Thanks everyone for joining. Today we have a fantastic session lined up for you. We'll be focusing on permissions, personas, and page building. We are joined by the amazing Ben Mackley from Automation Helpers. Before that, some housekeeping. This session is being recorded, as you can see. So that means you don't really need to take any notes. You'll be sent the session afterwards, and of course, it'll be available on our YouTube channel for you all to, watch again and again and again to answer all of your permission and persona related questions, right? Yeah, we'll be doing a kind of Q&A in the middle and at the end. So you can throw any of your questions into the kind of Q&A section of Zoom there. There should be a Q&A tab for you to throw your questions in there. We'll pause halfway through the session to kind of recap on some of the questions so that they don't grow too long. Yeah, what else do I need to say? Yeah, we'll be here for just under an hour, so we'll be wrapping up at 5:30 GMT, wherever you're calling it from. That will obviously be different. And yeah, that's it for now. So kicking off, if you don't know me already, my name is Darragh Mc Kay. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Noloco. So for everyone that might be kind of new to Noloco is a platform that helps businesses turn their business data into business apps that their team can customize and share with their clients and their team, apps that they can help their team optimize the daily runnings of their business. And today we're joined with one of the best partners in our network, Ben Mackley. He's the co-founder and president of Automation Helpers, and he is a fantastic demo kind of in store for you all on permissions, personas, and kind of how to manage all of those in your no-code app. Ben, do you want to give yourself a quick introduction?
Yeah, thanks, Darragh. So I think it's been a few months now that we've started working together. But my background and my co-founder Dan Liebman's background is in the automation space. So process automation, automation with AI. And so we founded Automation Helpers about a year ago. And we do everything from centralizing all of your data into one view. So helping companies streamline their processes, so connecting your back office invoicing tools like QuickBooks, and maybe your front end with the CRM like email, and bringing it into one place. And I think that's why we've really loved Noloco at Automation Helpers, is because it makes all of that seamless, where not only can you build your data in Noloco, but you can manage things like permissions and then have the UI for the front end. So we do everything from the technical integrations to helping with the business processes and mapping out what your flow should look like. So thanks for inviting us today, Darragh.
Yeah, so glad you could join us. Yeah, Automation Helpers have fantastic videos and tutorials on their YouTube channel as well. So go definitely check them out if you haven't already. Ben and Dan do some fantastic things with all across the no-code space, and more recently with Noloco. So yeah, today, like I mentioned, Ben will be giving a quick demonstration on personas, permissions, and page building. The demo will be broken up into two parts. We've got kind of 10 to 15 minutes on each part, breaking for Q&A in the middle. So feel free to throw your questions in the chat. I can already see we have one, so I know it's going to be a great session. So yeah, why don't I kick it off to you, Ben, to kind of introduce the topic.
Yeah. So when it comes to permissions and personas, I think oftentimes we think, oh, that's backend data. That's all about security and managing access to who can see what information. And that really is a part of it. Permissions are kind of a subset of a role. So a role, say an admin, can access everything, whereas maybe an individual user may only be able to create certain information or read certain information. So when we're talking about permissions, oftentimes we're talking about 4 different processes with the data. So it could be creating data, it could be reading or viewing information, it could be making updates, and then also deleting records. And so when we think about that, when we come to enterprise applications, we may have run across like the 404 message when we're just browsing the web and landing on a web page. And that's because of permissions that are set, or could be an error on the back end, but more often than not, it's just the user interface isn't matching the structure on the back end as far as who can access what with the data. But really today our discussion is going to focus around how permissions, especially in Noloco, can help you craft the right user experience or create the right user experience for your end users. And so although permissions and setting up the roles are very important for security purposes, especially if you're working in a data sensitive industry like healthcare or finance, really what it's for is, and the idea around these permissions and building the experiences around your data is enabling your users to do what they need to do as quickly as possible. So to illustrate this point there, if you want to go to the next slide, here in the United States,
sure
we have.
do. I'm looking forward to seeing what you have to say about this.
So there's two different restaurants here in the United States. So if you live on the West Coast, you'll be familiar with a burger place called In-N-Out. So similar style to McDonald's, but as you see on the menu on the left, it's extremely simple with their menu. Like really you have three different options. You can pick if you want a burger, you can pick if you want fries, and then a drink. And so it's very simple, and I guess it fits with the name, right? It's a quick way to get food and to get out and on with your day. And then the example on the right, I think this might be a more common internationally, but the Cheesecake Factory. It's a different type of experience where you come and you sit down and you have a server come to your table and take your order. And if you look at their menu, it's like a book. Like it's almost impossible to get through the entire menu, even if you were to sit there for an hour just perusing through it. And whenever I go to the Cheesecake Factory, I had tried a few different dishes, and I just select the same dish every time because I know I like it, and it's just a lot to go through, and it'd be impossible to try everything that the Cheesecake Factory offers. And so, two very different experiences, and both successful businesses in what they do. And when we're creating experiences for our users with Noloco, one of the main use cases is building internal apps. And that's a much different experience than creating something for an end user. So say a storefront to sell clothes or apparel. So building an application to track time logs or to track projects is going to be a lot different than say Nike trying to sell shoes and clothes. And to illustrate what we'll be talking about today, permissions are useful on both of these experiences, right? You need permissions for your internal apps, and you also need permissions for the experiences that you'd be creating for an end user. But to give an idea, I guess, around that with In-N-Out is, even though they have a very simple menu, they have something called a hidden menu that goes along with it. So if you're a frequent In-N-Out customer like I am, you'll know that the hidden menu is really just a specialization or taking what is offered on their main menu and adding some things to it. So you can get fries animal style, for example, and really that's just taking the sauce that goes on the burgers and putting it on the fries and adding some cheese to it. So it's a different experience. It's not on the main menu, but it's still available. So as we're talking about the experience today, if we're using the permissions and the role, the idea of permissions and roles, even though it doesn't exist on the menu, or even though it's not displayed on the page, you still have the capability of requesting those features. And so as we're crafting or creating these experiences for our customers, thinking about that as far as how we want to display the data and maybe what data we want to hold back until the customer wants to dig in and ask for it is going to be really important. And I think it's also important to think through the permissions before you start diving into them and setting them up and thinking, do you want to create an In-N-Out type of experience where your users are going to come on, get their actions or complete the tasks that they have at hand? Or do you want to give them an experience where it's more like Nike or Cheesecake Factory, where you want them to sit down and to take their time, add as many items as they can to the cart or to their order, so that way they're having a delightful experience, and that you're also benefiting from your business standpoint as well. So it's just really to set the stage before we dive into the example of what we have internally as far as building out a project management app with time tracking.
Brilliant. I think that's a great analogy and a great way to set the stage. So in summary, I suppose you're basically saying that, you know, permissions shouldn't be a kind of afterthought, and they play a very incredible role in the options that you present to your users, as well as kind of the experience that you present to your users. So yeah, no, that's fantastic. So at this point, I think you want to jump into your kind of your demo, or kind of
Yeah,
set the stage for what we'll be kind of looking at today.
yeah,
I can
let's
stop
jump in.
sharing.
So what I've built out, and Darragh, if you want to enable screen sharing, is what we've built out internally at Automation Helpers is our business process is to run projects with customers. So the general workflow is we'll help our clients with, say, an individual project that they have, or it could be an ongoing relationship where we support them as they're building out their operations and really scaling their business. And the interactions that we have with clients, it's very much helping them understand their business, but they also want to get a view into the work that we're doing. And so it's one of those things where in order for them to get real-time updates, we'd have to keep them constantly up to date with emails or notifications. And so what we've thought internally after, you know, running a number of projects with clients is, well, why don't we just build a portal where they could come in and see the project status? So that's what we'll be going through today, is taking a look at this setup and how we've created the roles and the permissions for our internal users and then our external users that are working with us. So to start, to explain the hierarchy, we have projects that then we log time against those projects. And so customers, being budget conscious, they want to be able to keep track of the project progress. And so the workflow that we have internally is logging time, and that should roll up to a project. And ideally, everyone that needs to would have access to the right information to create, to view the information, to update if needed. And then it's not as common, but if necessary, deleting the information that exists. So to just start off, the way that we thought about it, and really the way to approach permissions in general, I think a good time to think about them is the beginning, right? When you're beginning to formulate what your applications will look like and who's going to be using them. But really the time to dig in and actually start implementing permissions is after you have a basic structure put together. So once you understand your data structure, who the users are, and maybe you've built out a workflow to show the steps in the process and the different personas that are going to be involved. If you're like me, when I first started building applications, I was like, well, we'll just give everyone permission to see everything. Because it's difficult. It takes time and effort to just think through the permissions and to understand what that experience should look like for the end user. But really to create an application that people use, we've seen this with the number of customers where everyone just gets admin permissions. And what they do is they come in and they get overwhelmed. So this view that you see here could be overwhelming if you're a team member and you just come in for the first time and you're looking through and it doesn't really make sense what to do or how to process the information. And so by using permissions in the right way, we can actually create an experience that's much easier for the team to process, which will allow them or get them to want to use the software in the way that is intended. So just to explain the structure that we have, there's 3 different roles internally. We have admins that should be able to see everything. And that's the current view that we have here. We have managers that would want to see their team's information so that they can understand who has availability to work on the next project. And then there's team members who would want to see their own time logs and log their own time towards the projects. And then externally, we have customers that we'll get to here in a second. But let's say that we had a team member who came in and just started with our company for the first time. For them coming in and seeing the time logs, it's a lot to process. And so what we've done, and really the benefit of Noloco, is by setting permissions on the data on the back end, it automatically comes into the UI. So by setting up the permissions to only allow the team members to see their own records, it will create this user experience where Darby, as a team member, she's not overwhelmed by seeing, the hundreds of records for time entries. So that's I think the first thing, and one of the main differentiators with Noloco is that setting permissions on the back end actually translates to the front end. And so you just have to think about it once, as opposed to applying it on the back end and then coming to the front end and figuring out how everything works. That being said, sometimes it is useful to separate out the permission side of things with the front end, with the user experience and the view that the user would have. So to give you an example of how this could work, as an admin, we have permission to see all projects, but oftentimes it's not useful to see completed projects. We just want to see what's currently in the pipeline, what's currently happening. And so this tab that we have here for the active projects, what it does is it takes that entire list and it just filters it down, and it makes it really easy to manage that view. User experience aspect there with Noloco. And so this is using something on the front end called filters. So there is a difference between the back end permissions and then the front end filtering. So that's something as a Noloco, coming into Noloco for the first time, the permissions are very apparent when you're creating the experience, the user experience on the front end. And they're a nice addition to the permissions. But as you're thinking through your user's experience, I'd recommend starting on the back end with the permissions and then layering on the filters for the views where it makes sense. So they can be used in conjunction. And I think one of the things that at least I ran into when I was first starting, and that some of our team members have run into, is thinking that filtering on the front end is the same as setting up permissions on the back end as far as who can view what data.
Yeah, I think that's a really good distinction to make. So, not without getting too kind of security conscious, permissions, they really control which exact records this person should see, and they lock them out before that ever kind of hits their browser, or if they were able to make a network request or anything more technical than that, they wouldn't be able to access them even if they tried. Whereas filters, think of them more of like, how do I show them a different view of the data? Like, in this case, you've got active projects. You might have, projects in your backlog, right? They're not kind of restricted based on permissions, but they do play into permissions as well, right? And I think that's what you're trying to say. It's a really good point to illustrate.
Permissions are really the base of everything that you should be doing, and then filters,
exactly,
the nice cherry on top of the summary that you might be creating. So I think one of the other important points with Noloco is that it's not just the records that can be either filtered or you can set permissions on, but you can actually get very granular and go down to the field level. So most no-code platforms give you at least the ability to filter or to set permissions on the record level. But to give you an example of how the field level permissions can be set. So as an admin, there's a number of fields that we can see. So with the team, important to know who's on the team, and then just the structure as far as the management levels go. But building out a team view, for example, maybe the team members shouldn't see the levels of everyone else on the team. Or if you wanted to get more detailed, it could be salary, where managers should be able to see the salary of their team, and same with the administrators. But individuals shouldn't be able to see the salary of everyone else, since that's private data. And so you can set those permissions down at the record level, where if we switch to a team member view, you'll notice that that level, the field level for the individual is gone. So that way the team can still see the org chart, but you can protect that data that they shouldn't be seeing, at least on a global scale. So it's really helpful that Noloco has that built in automatically, and has that capability. Many other no-code platforms don't have the ability to do that.
Yeah, and I think that for me, the main benefit is that you set it up once in the permissions, and then you can confidently use that field anywhere across your entire app, knowing that Barbie, when they log in, won't be able to see that, right? You don't have to kind of keep track of which fields they can see and kind of set up custom filters or custom visibility rules on individual fields across your entire app, right? Because it's just set at the kind of source. And again, that's not just hiding it from the UI, it's also blocking it from coming down through out of the database in the first place.
Yep. So I think that's a good distinction. If you're trying to decide, should I use a filter or should I use permissions? The two things were permissions. If it's a security concern, absolutely use permissions. But then also with permissions, the fact that it's set for the entire application, it makes it really easy where you set the permission once and you can confidently include that information in any part of the application that you're building, knowing that it'll be set that way. So to give an example of how that works, with the projects, let's say that the administrators want to see just the high level metrics. So seeing a dashboard as opposed to, looking at it from a data standpoint. So we have all of the time logs. And if I switch to a manager view, so with Nathan, he's a manager on our team, for example. He has a filtered view where he can see the team members. So he can see Izzy and Darby, but he isn't able to see the time logs for myself or other people on the team that aren't a part of his team. And because we have the permissions set on the back end, it filters here in the time logs view. But as we go into the metrics will show us an overall view for the weekly hours that have been logged over the course of the last month in this case. But if I switch back to Nathan's view, you'll notice that it's applied automatically here as well, or at least it should here in a second. And so I was getting to that point that Darragh is making, that setting the permissions on the back end will work across all views in the application that you're creating.
Yeah, and that even just means you don't have to kind of create different views and different filters for different users, right? You can kind of build it once again and just kind of set it. You might need to reload that page. There you go. Yeah.
I think Darby doesn't have access to that page. Let me switch to that, Nathan.
That makes sense. That's another thing you can do as well.
Restrict access to pages as a whole. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as far as the front end goes, using the permissions to set things up really just helps because it's a one-time setup. And then it's also something that as you're thinking about the data setup, you don't have to worry about keeping everything in sync on the back end and on the front end. So everything, one of the things that I've loved about Noloco is that it's not only it's so easy to craft these experiences to create these once in the data and then it just reflects in the UI. But then there's also the ability to set the permissions on the UI level using different logic. So what we had done with Nathan, with him being able to see his team, for example, that used some custom logic that wasn't just, hey, based on this attribute in the data table, like restrict permissions. It was a few steps that we were able to get to show that. So being able to include logic in the permissioning set just really helps make more robust applications.
Yeah, I think that's a great kind of maybe stopping point. What do you think, Ben? Maybe if there's a few questions that people might have before we, in the kind of next part of the webinar, we're going to dive into how these are set up and how you can kind of make sure that you're showing the right data to the right people by jumping into the filters and the field permissions themselves. So do we have any questions, or if anyone wants to throw any questions, feel free. I know, Brandy, you asked a question a good few minutes ago at the start of the call. Not quite on the permission side, but more on the kind of page building side around what did you say? In regard to page building, any chance Noloco will add element alignment settings, being able to center an element that is set to 25% wide? That's a great question, actually. So at the moment, yeah, we do offer the ability to kind of make this chart 25% of the width of the page, for example, but not kind of aligned left or right or centered. At the moment, it's kind of more flowing. Yeah, all of these type of things are something that we're going to be working on in the kind of coming months. At the end of the day, we want to build the platform that's most flexible gives you the kind of the most options in terms of customization without overwhelming you, obviously, with kind of CSS or code, God forbid. So yeah, I absolutely think so, Brandy. But yeah, would love to kind of chat more about that as well. We have another question then as well, is kind of around the interplaying of different roles. Ben, I wonder if you can touch on this. Is like how do you define different roles for different permissions, sorry, for different roles? Maybe you're going to cover this in a few minutes, but maybe you might have a few high level thoughts as well.
Yeah, so I think this really gets back to the planning stage of when you're building your application, is thinking through the experience that you want your clients or your end users to have. And one of the things that I've discovered is there's probably a difference between internal and then external permissions. And I know I didn't cover it too much detail here, but the way that we're setting up the experience is that internally there's much more permission available to our users to see information about the team or time logs. Whereas a customer, so just going to like a customer admin view, for example, for them, there's only one action, maybe two main actions that they're looking to take. And that's, hey, what's the status of my current project? And what does it look like from an invoicing standpoint? Have I paid all of my invoices? So as you're thinking about permission or about really roles, I think the permissions is the granular level that's sometimes fairly difficult to tease out. So starting at that high level first of what do you want the experience to be? And then from there deciding who are the people participating in this experience. And I think that can help define what the roles are. And then from there getting a level deeper and saying, okay, in this specific role, what information should they be able to access? When should they be able to access that information? And how does it flow from role to role? And then after you have that mapped out, for me, I usually just write it out in notes. For a lot of people, it helps to actually build a flow chart to have like a starting point and then an end point, and then having swim lanes for each of the personas. And that shows the actions that they'll be taking. And then from there, you can take the actions and translate that into a permission level. And I think that then translates to an experience. So for example, the customer is able to see the projects. They're also able to see the time logs for their specific projects. But instead of creating so many tabs here on the left, it's more of that in and out type of menu that we wanted to create, where they would first start with, okay, let me look into a project. And then from there, they can see the specific time logs that are associated with that project here on the right.
Brilliant. Yeah, and I think you've kind of preemptively answered one of the questions that just came through as we started that question, which is how can you optimize the client experience portal, not kind of the internal team. I think this touched on it perfectly. The kind of two other, you've kind of touched on maybe two of the four levers, as I would like to say, that you have when you're kind of building a client portal. The first obviously is permissions, which is kind of the foundation. The next is the filters, kind of how those permissions and filters kind of interact. But then the next is, as you've kind of just touched on, the ability to hide certain pages, right? So you can have completely different views for different roles. So you might have different views for your clients, or you might even have different views within those clients. You might have managers that are clients. You might have, just general employees of those clients, and you might want to show them kind of an admin view versus an individual view. And you can do that too. And then the last layer is like being able to hide individual sections. So let's say the time logs there shouldn't be seen by the kind of general employee of one of your clients, but the manager should. Then of course you can kind of go all the way down to the granular kind of section level and kind of apply all of those same filters and conditions that we've just kind of spoken about. So I hope that answers that question. Another question that came in, is it better to start and give no permissions? What do you think about that, Ben?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question, because from a project delivery standpoint, I think there's this debate between delivering a product that's usable versus delivering a product that's lovable. So you might hear the terms like MVP, minimal viable product, versus MLP, minimal lovable product. And what I generally recommend to our clients is um, to it, the smallest thing that can deliver value is what you should ship, but also to test it in the smallest environment that you can. So I'd recommend um, getting shipping something or getting something in the hands of your users that doesn't have permissions if you need feedback from them on what the permissions should be. That being said, if you know pretty well what the process looks like, the permissions are fairly easy to set up in Noloco, where you know, maybe it's adding some permissions and then becoming more granular and being iterative and adding additional permissions as you talk with your clients. So I know that's probably a non-answer, but what I'd say is to start with no permissions, get feedback, iterate, and then can, just like you would improve the interface and the experience for the users on the front end, to layer on those permissions as you continue building. But I think also having a plan and having it written out and having it thought through before you end up launching to the entire, like, let's say that you have a team of 10. So maybe it's releasing to one person first, but I would recommend thinking through it and having permissions in place before you launch to the broader audience or the total population.
Absolutely. And I think, we're talking about talking through it and doing diagrams. It's generally more intuitive than you think. Like if you look at it from a client perspective, if you've got something like client notes, you don't want the client to see that, right? So you kind of hide it from them. If you've got multiple clients, you want to make sure a single client can only see their data. Like that's quite intuitive. The same goes with like internal tools. It's like slightly less obvious, but again, there's things where you might want to just separate out who can see what based on their ownership or their kind of hierarchy within the company. And you kind of starting from there. I think that's what you're really saying, Ben, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Great. Cool. Do you want to, I think there's no more questions at the moment, or well, there's one, but I think we'll best save that towards the end. Do you want to jump into kind of how these permissions are set up and how they influence what you kind of see in the app?
Yeah. So let's jump into the fun part is building these out. So really permissions start with the roles. And if you're using another tool on the back end, another no-code tool, say Airtable or SmartSuite, we use SmartSuite internally for a lot of our data management. The idea of this user list was something that I think I was really impressed with when I first started using Noloco. But then there's also a lot of elements around this that are maybe not as intuitive unless you jump into the documentation or you play around with it. So to just describe what the experience is like adding users and creating the roles in Noloco, the default is if you're using a backend system like Airtable or SmartSuite, is to pull in the users that exist in those systems. So if you don't use a user list, it will pull in those users automatically. And then you can also create users directly in Noloco. And if you create users in Noloco, and Darragh, you can correct me here, but I believe if you create the users, it will send them an invitation to join the system automatically. Whereas the difference is if you're using a list, so if you have a table in SmartSuite or Airtable that has the list of users, you can pull them in using this feature here, and it will create them as users in Noloco, but it won't send out the invitations directly to them. So that way you can manage the invite process. And if you're in testing mode and you don't want to invite users yet, you can be rest assured that you can import your users without all of them getting an invite to come into Noloco. So I think that's also an important point, just with the pricing model as well, as far as when users come in.
Absolutely, yeah. So just a kind of quick summary of what a user list is for everybody. It's really just if a lot of people have lists of their users, their clients or their team in something like SmartSuite, Airtable, or Google Sheets. And it's just a way of syncing that into Noloco. So you can tell Noloco what their email address is and what their first and last name is in really. And then as Ben might get into, you can kind of layer on what roles should they have based on different conditions. And it's really just a way of not quickly bringing your data in from somewhere else and then linking that into our existing permissions and roles structure.
And I think one of the amazing things with Noloco is you can have multiple user lists, which is really beneficial because um, what I always recommend from a data standpoint is to group all data that's similar together. So instead of splitting out, say that the a people table into 5 different tables with vendors and customers and partners, makes sense to group them into one. But for what I've realized is it also makes sense to have internal users in one table and then external users, so say customers and partners, in a separate table. So you might have a roster or an employee list, and then you might have a CRM that handles external users. And so by using the user list, you can actually include both groups in as users in Noloco. So it makes it really
And I think
powerful.
particularly for Smart Suite, where you can link between solutions, right? And for anyone who's not super familiar with Smart Suite, a solution is just a base, or like an Airtable base, or a Google Sheet, which has multiple kind of tables within it. In Smart Suite, you can very easily link between them. So your customer's solution might actually be linking directly to your kind of people solution. Makes total sense to have them in separate places. And if we could only support one list, well, then you wouldn't be able to do that as easily.
So this helps, I think, from a permissioning standpoint too, to have the flexibility here in Noloco to handle it how we need to. All right. So once you have users in Noloco, the next step is to build out the roles that each of them would have. So you see that there's some roles that are built in with these users here. And here in the settings with the user roles, you can create as many roles as you need to. What I found is having at least a couple, and usually it's at somewhere between 2 and I mean we're probably overdoing it here, but somewhere between 2 and 5 is usually sufficient for each application that we've built. And then with the roles, there's the ability to state how they are able to interact with the data. So if they're coming in creating, you can allow them to modify. And then same with accessing the data. So this would be like an admin permission as far as accessing all of the data. So setting up the roles, this is high level as far as just naming the roles. And really where the permissioning comes in is in the data, where we've imported the tables and we now want to say who can access what from a record standpoint and even from a field standpoint. So in the example that we were showing earlier with the time logs, the team member should only be able to see their individual entries. And then we'll talk about the field level here in a second. But to run the roles, you'll see that there's this little shield icon here. And so clicking on the tab will take you to the data, but clicking on the shield will take you to the permissions. And by enabling permissions, you're able to set up the permission set for each of the users. And so to talk about the high level permissions, and one that's fairly common is with the team member, like we were showing, by saying that they're able to only access records that they have created and that they're assigned to, is what enables that throughout the entire application. So this step here will allow you to build whatever logic you need to. So you'll notice it's the same logic or the same steps as you would if you were to set up workflows. And so the same idea allows you to set up permissioning, and you can get down to the field level specifics here. So I think with this one, for example, the team members aren't able to see the customer accounts or update project or create new projects. That's a permission that's specific for the managers and for the admins. And taking it a step further with creating custom permissions, and I think this is really one of the powerful features of Noloco that you don't see in other platforms, is the ability for managers to see their team and the record, the time entries for their team. We are able to do that by using the data structure that's set up to craft or to create this permission role right here, where if the consultant is someone on the logged in user's team, and so in this case, it's the manager who's logged in, this will enable the manager to see everybody on their team. So the permission rules allow us to get really granular. And this is one that I had to sit down and map out to make sure that I was thinking through it in the right way. And so I think that's why it's also really valuable to start thinking about permissions in your planning stage. Because if not, if you have to ship something and you're on a tight deadline, you might just throw up your hands and be like, hey, this is too difficult. I'm just going to give everyone access to everything. And it erodes trust in your users when they come on. The first impression really does mean a lot. So taking the time to just think through it will allow you to create it quickly.
Yeah. So what, just in case everybody's kind of looking at this, kind of wondering what this exactly does, in short, there's two or kind of conditions here. So yeah, automation helper managers, which is the rule that this permission rule is being applied to, they can see any time log that they're assigned to, their own ones, or, and this is the second block, the time logs of which of anyone in their team, right? So they can see their subordinates or the people that they reporting to them, all of their time logs as well as their own. And that's pretty much it, which, so you can see the first section there was kind of what we saw on the team member one, whereas the second section there is an extension of that, which encompasses much more rules. And that's what Ben showed us at the beginning of the call, where you kind of switch between users and you kind of saw that the managers were able to see, theirs and everyone else's, and then the individual employees or on the team were just able to see their own. So it sounds very complicated, but once you say it like that, you really just kind of match the drop downs to the words, and you've got your rule. And then, as we said as well, you just need to save it once, and then it's done. You don't have to think about it again.
Mm-hmm. So that's the beauty of creating these. And when you get to the point where, if you're building a complex application, like we work with some customers that they're using Noloco to build SaaS applications, where that it's going to be not just internal users, but they have partners, and then their partners' customers that use the applications. And so when it gets to the point where you're creating a number of these permissions, being able to set this up once and then clone it and make the adjustments that are necessary are really what make Noloco so powerful. You don't have to worry about setting up a database and managing the APIs and managing the permission sets with everything on the back end and matching it on the front end. It's really coming in, creating it once, and then you're set to go with everything else on the front end. So you can really focus on the business processes as opposed to the build with what you need to do. So
yeah, go for it.
Yeah, one other small thing that I was actually running into and Darragh was helping me with earlier is if you're using another system on the back end like Airtable or SmartSuite, if you make adjustments in those systems, in order to see those reflected here in Noloco, I think the first step is to sync. So the data will sync automatically and very quickly, but the schema updates, you'll notice that sometimes you'll need to, if you want those updates reflected in here as you're working, to just go into the table and make sure to sync it. But then the data will also come in, and by default, it will be disabled for all users except admins. And it's an important point here. It's a security reason that exists, but just something to be aware of if you're making the updates in your backend system and you're frustrated that it's not reflecting in SmartSuite, it's probably because of those two things. Is the first, need to sync the schema from your backend, and then the second is by default it's disabled, so you'll need to come through and make the updates for the roles. And Darragh, do you want to speak to why this feature exists the way that it does?
Yeah, look, I mean, it was a choice we made at the very beginning, and I'm very glad that we did, because you could imagine you have a client table, and you, like I mentioned earlier, you add client notes. The last thing you'd want is for you to add that column to your Airtable or your SmartSuite, and then for that the data in that kind of to be just publicly accessible as soon as you add it, because you forgot to come here to update your permissions, right? Whilst it might be a little bit inconvenient that you have to come here and set it, trust me when I say that the headache of explaining to clients why they could see your notes or you know, or anything else about a better record or anything that shouldn't be publicly accessible, that's significantly less. And we do have the little dots. So if you follow those yellow dots, if you hover over the one on the very left, if you keep going, the one on the actual nav bar, yeah, you'll see that there's a warning there that there are incomplete permission rules. The idea there is that you click that tab and then you follow the yellow dots again. So you kind of come down to the time logs one, and that one again says that there are incomplete. I think if you hover over the dot itself, it should say something. Oh no, maybe it does. But yeah, once you click on this, you can see that there's a big yellow warning here that says there are new fields without rules. And so if you click into each one of these, all you need to do then is decide whether you want to give people read, update, or create permissions. You can decide to give them nothing, right? All you have to do then is hit save, and then just kind of make sure you action them, basically. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So just something to be aware of, and generally what I recommend is when you're creating applications. Sorry, Darragh, you cut out there for a second, so I don't know if you have something else to add there, but when you're creating these applications, I generally start on the back end first, creating the data. But of course, there's always times where you need to add an additional field or a customer request, your client's request additional features, and so you're making updates to the schema. So just something to be aware of. It's usually a quick fix of making the update on the back end and then coming in. Or just doing it directly in Noloco.
Yeah, so we only have about 9 minutes left, so I don't want to run over time. So we might open the floor up to questions if you kind of don't have much else you want to share on this, Ben.
Yeah, I think this is a good time for questions at this point.
Brilliant. Yeah. So kind of sticking with the permissions trend, Rob, you have another question. It's a good question. Why do you not see delete as an option besides read, update, and create? Truthfully, it's just something that hasn't been asked of us all that much. Deleting records is not something many people do anyway. There's no kind of default action for it. But it's something that we've been asked about a few times, and it's definitely something we plan to kind of implement in the near enough future. Again, if you have any further questions about that, please let us know, and we kind of love to get the context about that as well. Daniel had a good question. Again, more around the layout. So when Ben clicked on a record earlier, it expanded the details of that record on the right-hand side of the screen rather than opening a new page. How is that done? I think he's referring to the project view this one, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So we'll just click here and
you just click the word projects on the breadcrumbs. Sorry.
Yeah,
yes.
There we go. Yeah, so it's the display. It's a out of the box display type called the split view that allows you to see that. So also something that is unique to Noloco as far as
I think so. Yeah, and you can also customize how big or small you want the sidebar to be there in case you have a dense view or whatever. And again, it's similar to our rows layout, so you can group by up to 3 fields, and all your action buttons still work, all your filters still apply when you're scrolling right. So we will call it the inbox view. We call it the split view. That's what that is. Great question. Any other questions from anyone else? We've got one more here, but I'm just prompting you before we kind of wrap up. Rob had one more question around examples of notes of the you mentioned earlier that you kind of you like to start with like sketching out the kind of permissions and the kind of roles and stuff. Do you have any? I think you mentioned that do you just use pen and paper for that, or do you kind of have any software you use for that? Or it'd be great to hear how you and automation helpers think about these things.
Yeah, so I think the planning stage should equate to the size of the project that you have. So with most projects, at least that we've worked in, they're small enough where just sketching it out on pen and paper, having a discussion, putting some notes in like a Google Doc or mean, I use my own notes tool oftentimes to just get everything in my brain into I guess an organized list. If you have a more complex application where there's going to be multiple users, so that scenario that I was talking about with a SaaS application that you may be building, and say there's 5 different internal roles, there's 3 different partner roles, and then the partner's customers, there's like 5 different roles that they need. The more complex that it is, the more important the documentation would be up front. So, I mean, we've done everything from, sketching it out to on pen and paper, or the digital equivalent on Google Docs, to actually building out an entire flow chart in, say, a Miro board or in Lucidchart. Because of the time that it takes, and just the complexity of putting something together in Lucidchart, if it's just a couple of roles or an internal app that, 1 or 2 roles, it's often easier to just put it on pen and paper, test it out, and then talk internally before rolling it out.
Makes sense. One more question from Joel, and I think it's actually a great one. I think you brought it up yourself when we were chatting yesterday. So, can you speak to how workflows respect permissions? Do you have anything to add to that? I certainly do, if you want to jump in.
Maybe I'll let you start, and I can add some additional.
Yeah. So it's a great question, actually, Joel. So as Ben demonstrated, you can very easily prevent your clients or your team members from updating or creating values on certain fields. But sometimes you do need them to, you do need them to be able to kind of set maybe defaults on those fields. And that's where workflows can come in. So if you don't mind opening up the workflows tab, Ben, just so everybody's kind of vaguely aware. So workflows are automations that live inside Noloco, and they respond to different triggers, such as when a record is updated, created, or deleted, or indeed when you press an action button, and one of the actions in that button is to run an on-demand workflow. So in workflows, you can also create, update, and delete records. These actions won't respect your permissions at all. They'll be ran as an admin, as if you're kind of writing directly to the data, which of course you are, which means it's a great way to say, maybe you don't want your clients to be able to update the status of a project, but you do want them to be able to create new projects. And by creating new projects, when you create a new project, you want it to be in the kind of planning stage, right? So you wouldn't be able to have the two without creating a workflow that gets triggered when a project is created, and then that workflow would update that project to have the status field planning. That's a kind of very quick off the top of my head example, but that's a great way of using permissions and workflows, and how workflows can kind of get around some of the limitations that permissions introduce, but also those limitations are also strengths, right? So the two kind of work out quite nicely in that way. I think that kind of speaks to most of it. Do you have anything to add maybe on that? Maybe that's news to you, Ben. I'm not sure. I don't think so. But
and I think that's a fairly common use case. So like updating a status, for example. I mean, if you don't want the entire team updating the status because people make mistakes, and then, I don't know, maybe a rogue employee thinks that they should be updating the status when in reality it shouldn't be that case. So by restricting that, but still enabling, let's say a certain action should trigger that status update of completing tasks, for example. That's where the combination of permissions and workflows comes in really handy.
Brilliant. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So yeah, it's a great question, Joel. Thanks so much for that. I think that's all we have time for today then. Really appreciate everybody tuning in till the end. Some great questions there from everybody. And thank you so much, Ben. This has been really insightful. I hope everybody learned a few things. I sure did. Where can people hear more about the work that you and Dan are doing at Automation Helpers?
Yeah. So Dan Lehman has the YouTube channel. So if you search Dan Lehman, or really if you Google Noloco Smart Suite, Dan's videos will likely pop up. You can also go to our website, automationhelpers.com, and schedule time to talk with us if you're looking for help or have questions on the projects that you're working on. And hopefully we'll do a few more of these, Darragh. Like really,
absolutely.
Really...
I'm looking forward to it. Yeah. Excellent. Great. Well, thanks so much, everyone. We have another webinar scheduled for 2 weeks' time. Usually they're every 3 weeks, but obviously we're running up to the holidays. I didn't think anybody would show up to the one like a few days before the holidays. So we've kind of pushed that forward to 2 weeks' time. So keep an eye on your inbox and you'll see the invitation for that. But again, thanks so much again, Ben, for your time. And thank you everyone else as well. If you have any other questions, please reach out to us kind of in our community or in our chat, and we can even set up some time if you want kind of more time than that. But yeah, thanks everyone, and see you all again soon. Bye bye.